Aloha and welcome to this screencast, part 5 of the digits application. I'm super psyched about this one because we're going to add another collection to the system, and really at this point we're going to kind of start to tread into the waters of building a data model, and any kind of complicated application has a data model, which I'm going to define as just being a set of collections, multiple collections, which have dependencies between each other. And so we'll see a really simple example in this experience of how you incrementally build a data model using a set of collections and by making relationships between them. If you've taken a database class, you should be all over the idea of data models, and this will just be kind of how we do it with Mongo as opposed to a relational database. But if you haven't taken a database class, never fear. It's not that hard. You just have to kind of think through what the relationships are that you want to specify between the different entities in your system. So what's going to happen at the end of this is that we will have augmented our system so that associated with each contact is the ability to add a timestamped note. And you can see here for Henry, there's for both of these we have the field add a timestamp note, but for Henry we actually made a note, and the note was automatically timestamped. So you can see this note was on March 5th, 2018 that note was added, and that each of these notes are associated with one specific contact. So very simple, kind of simple thing, and you might think, well, that's easy. I'll just extend the contacts collection with a field that'll have an array of strings in it, and maybe, I don't know, maybe an array of objects with a string and a date field or something like that. And you could do that, but you're going to run into all sorts of pain when you start trying to manipulate these timestamp notes in any way different from what you're seeing right here. So for example, if we want to have a page, an auxiliary page where we listed all of our notes organized not in terms of the context they're associated with, but just straight chronological order, then you'll start to find that embedding this entity within another entity becomes complicated with respect to augmenting its functionality. The better idea is to create a data model where you have a separate collection just for these notes, and you relate them to other collections of interest like contacts. And then once you set it up that way, then you can add all sorts of functionality, and it's very straightforward to do it. So anyway, you should be watching the screencast before starting the WOD for the first time, because there's a lot of some level of complexity here. You might as well be familiar with it before you try it on your own. So let's talk a little bit more about data models. The notion is we're going to have 3 collections. We have a users collection. We've always had that. And I'm just giving you a little table here which kind of shows you the fields. Each row represents one document, and in the users collection, the fields that we're interested in is the _ID field, which is a unique ID assigned by Mongo. And then it turns out there's emails. There's a username field, which is another unique field for the users collection that's enforced by Meteor. So we could almost use the username, and in fact we do. We could use the username just like the _ID field because they're both unique IDs. And then there's this roles field, which we've used to specify that this particular user is an admin. Here's what the contacts collection looks like. As with every Mongo collection, it has an _ID field, which has a unique ID, and it's first name, last name, address, image, description. And then it's got this owner field, and what you can see is the owner field is basically a reference to a specific row in the users collection. So these first 2 documents in the contact collection refer to the second row because we're using owner johnson@foo.com, which we use to look up the username field. So the owner field in this must correspond to a given username in this particular table. So we've already got this kind of idea of a data model where we have one collection referencing another collection. And what we'll do for the notes field is we're going to create a new collection. It'll always have that underscore ID field because every Mongo has it. We'll have the actual note that the person's going to type in, and there'll be a timestamp which the system will add to every document when it's created. And then we're going to have two other fields. We're going to have a contact ID field, and that's going to contain the underscore ID, or the doc ID as you'll often hear it referred to as, for the specific contact. So you can see here, this contact right here for Philip Johnson starts EHT, and these two notes start off EHT, which, so I'm just using that as shorthand to say that these first two notes refer to the first row in the context collection, which is Philip Johnson. So these first two notes are associated with a Philip Johnson field. And Philip Johnson was created by John at foo.com, so we also see that John at foo.com is in this in these two rows as well. I'll get to that in a second, why we have the owner field. And then the third document in the notes field has a contact ID starts with GUA, which we look it up, and that's Kim Binstead. So this third note is associated with the Kim Binstead contact, and we know that because of the contact ID. Now we also know that Kim Binstead was created by the user admin at foo.com, and so we see the owner field here is also admin at foo.com. And so you might be asking yourself, once we have this contact ID, we have everything we need to figure out who the owner is. Why do we add that in addition? And the answer is that when we publish this notes collection to users, we only want to publish the notes that they've actually created, right? And the fastest, simplest way to figure that out and only publish the notes that are that are owned by a given user is to add this owner field with the username of the person who actually created that note. So we could indirectly get it from this information, but just turns out that everything is so much simpler if we add this owner field in that we do it. So that's the data structure. You can read through this and kind of ponder it for a second, but nothing very complicated here. And once you've done this third notes collection, you can go add a gazillion collections and just figure out, like who cares, who needs to know what are the relationships, and I'm going to add in these fields as necessary and build this complex interrelated data model that represents my application domain. All right. So before doing this, if you finish the contact forms branch or the context forms practice WOD from before, you should merge that into master. And then we're ready. You can see if I go here, we have our digits application, and we can edit that. All that stuff is implemented. So let's start our timer and get going. So we'll start off by creating a branch called Notes1. So we'll say branch, new branch, Notes1. And we'll publish it so that it exists at GitHub. And we'll watch it do that for a second. Okay. And we'll, if necessary, start up our application using meteor npm run start. Actually, it's not necessary because we're already running it. And you can see if we go here, we can refresh. We get these two pages. So our application is running. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create the note collection, which is, this guy here. Remember, it's got to have these fields: note, created at, contact ID, and owner. ID, underscore ID is always created by Mongo by default. We don't have to ever do that. So the way that I recommend you do it is to start off by making a copy of the contact directory in app imports API. So in app imports API, there is already a note directory. I'm sorry to say, but we'll just, let me just delete that. That's a leftover. So you won't have that when you get there. That's kind of a Git thing that wasn't good. So we'll say, we'll make a copy of the contact directory, and we'll copy it. We'll call it note. Okay, and then we'll rename this contact.js to be note.js. And then in the index.js, we got to import note.js. And then in the note.js, we're creating a new meteor collection called notes. So this should be notes. These have to be unique. And then note schema. It's a new simple schema, and we'll say notes attach schema, note schema, and then we'll export notes and note schema. And now we just have to figure out what the heck goes in there. And if we go back here, we need a note, contact ID, and owner as a string, and create it as a date. So note, contact ID, and owner. So note, contact ID, and owner as a string. And then we had created at as a date. Okay, so notice contact ID. One of the things that's tricky is to get this ID correct. And actually here, I'll edit that. That should be a lowercase d. Hopefully for you, that will be a lowercase d. So we've got no contact ID and owner as string and created at as a date. No contact ID and owner as a string, created as a date. Okay, we check, we've got the green check mark. So it looks like we've created our notes collection just fine. And then we want to edit app import startup both index.js to import the API slash note. A lot of typos in here. So if we go to both startup both index.js, we need to import note. Okay, that makes sure that this definition of the note collection is defined both on the client and the server side. And then we're going to make a copy. Now we have to kind of initialize our publications and data and so forth. So we'll go into import startup server contact.js and make a copy of contact.js called note.js. Okay, so startup server contact.js, propeller C, server, propeller V, note.js. And then when we open this up, the thing is we only need a publication in here. And we only need a single publication. We don't need this admin one. So the only one we actually need, and we can get rid of roles, is to, and we don't want notes, we don't want contacts. We want to import notes from API note.js. So we're going to create a single publication called notes, and this will return a cursor to all of the notes by the currently logged in user. And if there's no currently logged in user, then it returns an empty, turns to this.ready, which just basically is nothing. Okay, so that's the single subscription that we need. So whenever we go to a page that needs notes, we're going to get all of the notes that this user owns. And then later on, we got to filter to figure out which of the notes that a specific contact needs. Okay, so we've done the server contact.js. We'll not create any default notes. So we just have a single publication called notes that publishes all the notes associated with the current login. And then we've got to go back. We've created this guy, so we have to go into index.js, and we've got to propeller D note to make sure that this actually gets loaded, this note.js, whenever the on startup, when the server starts up. Okay, so there we go. We basically created the note collection, and you could make a little, like, you know, reference guide to yourself saying here are the steps you need to go through whenever you want to create a new collection. Okay, now we're going to create the note component. Going up here, it's going to be, you know, this little guy in here that displays a given note. And we're going to use, because I think it's cool, the feed component. in React Semantic UI. It's tailor-made for this kind of situation, and it's really cool. You can go through and go, wow, there's all these cool things. None of which we're really going to use. We're not going to use really any of the cool things, but we'll set up a feed anyway with some non-cool things, just so you kind of see how you can use this specific component, and then you can totally make it more cool when you're doing something like this in your own applications, because you just fiddle around with the component to make it look good. And so each of the notes are going to have this particular structure. You have a feed, and then inside you have a kind of a array or a listing of feed events, which are single feeds. And so this is going to be the individual feed item, basically. So what we'll do is we'll make a copy of, in components, contact.js called note.jsx. So contact.jsx, propeller C, propeller V, note.jsx. And then let's go take a look at this, and we're going to basically say note extends react.component, and note prop types. It takes a note, which is an object, and we'll say note here, and then inside we're going to have it render this. Okay, I'm giving you this because you could spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to render this, and just doesn't seem, for this particular practice wad, I don't see the purpose. So I'm just going to let you can just cut and paste this, and some stuff gets done kind of nicely. Like by calling this to locale date string enus, you get the date printed out in a reasonably compact format, and I had to like look around to find that thing. So you can just kind of look at this, and there's some stuff in here that's kind of interesting. Now what we can see is we've got a couple properties. We've got the note property, and it's going to be passed an object of note. There's the created at field, and then we got the note being passed in, and the note field within the note entity is the actual you know what I'm wondering? Yeah, there we go, note. That's the actual string containing the thing that you want to say. Okay, so we have a note as a property, and I don't see any errors with ESLint, so that's a good sign that we've made all the changes that we need. Okay, so each note component must be passed a note document as a property called note, so we've done that. All right. Now we're going to add the note feed to each contact. So we have this note component, and so what we're going to do is we're going to want to display all the notes associated with a particular card, and we'll do that by creating a new section of the card, a new card content.extra, which is going to start with this feed thing, which is the outer the global entity for semantic UI, within which are going to be a bunch of these feed events. And then what we're going to populate inside those feeds, we're going to map through all of the notes associated with the contact, and we'll just return one of these node instances, which is basically going to be one of these guys, right? All right, so let's go. So we're going to go, we can actually make a copy of this, and then we can go to contact, our contact component, and then at the bottom we can just do one of these, and we notice that we need to say that notes is required. Well, first of all, feed is required, so let me add that. Okay, and then we have a property that's got to be passed in called notes. So down here I'll make a copy of this line, and I'll say notes, and it's an array. Okay, and what else? What are we doing wrong here? Oh, we've got to import note. So we'll say import note from / imports UI components note. Okay, are we happier now? Yes. All right, so everything, so what we've done now in contact, we've created this extra component that's going to be a feed, and the feed is going to contain all of the notes, okay, that have been passed in as a property to this contact, okay, right here. And then a note, just to kind of review, a note is one of these feed event guys, okay, and it's basically just going to display the time the note was created and then the actual note thing as the summary. All right, so far so good, not too complicated. Okay, and now we're going to update list contacts to pass each contact its associated notes. Okay, so this is kind of where the rubber hits the road. This is where we're connecting things together. So in list contacts, we're going to start by subscribing to the notes publication as well as the contacts collection. So let's go to list contacts. Okay, so we're going to make a copy of this. We'll call this subscription 2, which isn't the most revealing, but it's certainly easy. And then we will say notes is going to be notes dot, well, let me just make a copy of this contacts line, make my life easier. So notes is going to be notes.find.fetch. Okay, and then we've got to get our notes. So we'll make a copy of, because notes is not defined. Well, notes is defined. So this basically says what is the notes? Well, the notes is of this collection in Mongo. Okay, so by importing it here, we have this pointer to a Mongo collection called notes, and then by subscribing to it, this is the line that kind of populates that Mongo collection with the notes that we want it to have. And what are the notes that we want it to have? Well, this publication says the notes that we want to have in that Mongo collection for a particular client are just the notes that are owned by that particular client. Okay. Now the final thing is that we want to we want to say that we want to display this page to.ready. So this is our way of basically saying, if you look at the render, we check to see if this ready property is true, and if so, we render the page, which is this. Otherwise, we render a loader. Okay, and so this is the kind of the way Meteor and React, work together. Is you do this subscription thing, and then you call this ready function. And so once Meteor has taken care of making sure that Mongo, its local Mongo in the client, has got all the data that it needs, then it makes these ready things true. And then this tells React, okay, go ahead and render the page because now all the data is there. Okay, so let's go back here. So we pass notes as a property just like contacts. Okay, so we want to pass notes as a property just like contacts. We have to define notes prop array. Okay, so we have contacts, notes, and ready. Contacts, notes, and ready. So there should be symmetry here. If you're returning 3 properties here from this with tracker thing, you better make sure that all 3 of those properties are declared with their appropriate type in this prop type so that things work the way you want it to. Okay, change the ready prop to be true only when both subscriptions are ready. We did that. Update props to include an array of notes. We did that. So we did all 4 of these things. And then we want to pass the notes that we've now gotten into our contact. Okay? And here's a way to do it. And I'm going to copy it in here first. And then I'm going to explain, because this takes a little bit of, not a lot, but it does take a little bit of thinking to get there. And the notion is and I'm going to basically put this on a new line. Okay. Oops. Okay, another typo. I'm really sorry. That this publication returns all of the notes associated with this user, but that isn't the set of notes that we want to pass into a particular contact. Into a contact, we want only the notes associated with that specific contact. And so the way we do that is we say the notes parameter to our contact is going to be the result of invoking filter on all our notes, where the notes out of this array that we want to retain that results from the filter call are those notes where the contact ID field of the note is the same value as the underscore ID field of our contact. So we're matching up the notes associated with this specific contact as we map through. Does that make sense? So we're mapping through contacts. We've got this contact object. We get its ID. We check to see, hey, is the note that we're interested in, does it have that, is it associated with this particular contact by virtue of the fact that it has the underscore ID field in its contact ID field? If so, awesome, we keep it in there. Okay? That's how that looks. And okay, so now we can have our kind of first test. So if we've implemented all this correctly, then what we should see is that everything's okay here. And also, if we go back to here, we'll see that everything's still okay here. We can do a refresh, for example, and nothing breaks, and with any luck, nothing, there's no error messages in the console, so everything's running fine. But what you can see here is that we've got this little extra little space here underneath the edit, and that's where our feed of notes would go if there were any notes. Otherwise, since there are no notes, we just get this little additional space here. So that's an indication that you're good to go at this point, and it's actually it's rendering your feed, your semantic UI feed component. There's just no events, no feed events. So it does this, I don't know, little 10 pixel space thingy. All right, and I'm showing you the admin user here, but it actually turns out that it's a little better to show John at foo.com. But whichever way, it's fine. All right, now we want to implement add note. So remember, up at the top, we not only had a feed, which here's an example of a feed event, but we also had this little component here that allows us to add notes. Otherwise, this whole thing is worthless. So how do we do that? So we're going to create a copy of the add contact page, the component in pages. We're going to call it add note, but we're going to put it into the components directory, not the pages directory, because this add contact thing is actually, it's a component of another page, not a page in and of itself. So let's start by doing that. So we're going to take add contact.jsx, propeller C, and then we're going to paste it into components, and we're going to call it add note.jsx. Okay, and then we're going to start doing the standard stuff that we always do, which is to change add note here, and then we got to change add note down here. And then I'll go back here to say that each node has a note, an owner, a contact ID, and created at field. And I'm going to show you, because again, this is a little tricky to just explain. I thought about explaining it, then I thought I'm just going to show you the code. It's a lot easier. The idea here is that inside here, even though there is an owner and a created at field and a contact ID field, we don't want to display any of those things in the actual form. The only thing we want the user to have to do is just type something in, and then we'll automatically add the timestamp, automatically add the contact ID, automatically add the owner. All right. So how do you do that? Well, you do it by saying, okay, here's our text field that you'll actually fill in. Here's your submit button. If you happen to make an error, which is kind of unlikely, well, I guess if you press submit without doing anything, it would be an error. But then we provide these hidden fields that supply the other information that we need for this form to work correctly. Because remember, it's always checking the schema to see that we've created a document that satisfies the constraints of the schema. So let me copy that, and then in add note, we will inside this segment, okay, we're going to put this, and then we don't need any of this other stuff because we're already inside a a grid container, etc., etc. So I'm going to do this, and I'll do a propeller matter L to get things a little more nicely formatted. Actually, I like it like this, looking like this a little better, but anyways, now it's indented correctly. And then we notice that we have a couple properties being passed in, props.owner and props.contactID. So we've got to add a add note.proptypes equals, you can copy this from some other place, or you can just kind of remember, owner prop types got to be a string, and it's required, and we need contact ID, which is also a required string. So I'll make a oops, that should be a comma, and then contact ID should also be required. Okay, and then we have to import prop types from prop types. It's a little irritating. All right, and so then we get rid of long text field because we don't need that. We get rid of grid and header because we don't need that. And we could say, add note failed, add note succeeded if we want a more specific kind of error message. Okay, and then here we want to change this to actually be the stuff associated with note. So it's a note owner contact ID created at are all being read from the form. We get the owner from here, and then we say note, note, oh right, the note, yeah, so we get the owner from here, so we don't need the owner here. So note owner contact ID created at, and then this is going to be notes dot insert. Okay, so now we can say notes and note schema from note note. Okay, and so note schema is not used, which reveals another place we need to edit. So now we have our form, which is a segment. I'm going to add this timestamp note. Let me see what else is wrong. So this is a, don't use this anymore. And we still got, oh wait, shoots. Note, oh there's this extra space. Note owner contact ID created at is going to be inserted. Note owner contact ID created at. Okay, so that looks really good. Let's see what else is being. So we'll get rid of that. Finally, we've got the green check mark, which gives us some confidence that we're not making a mistake. I'm just looking through here again, see if I see anything. It looks pretty good to me. We'll see. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Okay, and so we can see that the add note component needs to be passed an owner and a contact ID as a property from the component that calls it. That's because of this.props.owner, this.props.contact ID. So we go back here, you can see we're defining these two properties. They're required. So whenever we call add note, we better be passing an owner and contact ID property because we're going to be using them here. Okay, so the last thing is to add our add note component to contact. And so we can just do the kind of this what we did before. We're going to add another little extra component to the very bottom below the card content to the field, and it could look like this. And you can see we're calling add note. We've got our owner, and we're passing owner and contact ID just like we needed to. So if we go back to the contact component and we insert it right at the bottom, contact component. Then we see we need to define add note. So we're going to import add note from UI components, add note, right? Yeah. Okay. And there we go. Right? That was pretty easy. So we've passed the owner and contact ID into the add note component. If we've implemented this correctly, then the contact component should now look like this. Alright, so here's the moment of truth. Let's go see. That looks good. And there we go. We've got a timestamp note field being available. We don't have anything in our console. So let's say Henry. What should we say that we've contacted Henry, confirmed for a surf sesh on next Monday, March 12th at 6 o'clock a.m. Dawn Patrol. So let's do submit, and there we go. It succeeded. You can see it's now there, and you do see that there's this warning. This warning can be ignored. In fact, with any luck, you guys won't actually ever see this warning because I contacted the developer of the uniforms package, and this was a bug, and he's fixed it. So when you do your npm install, you should get a version of uniforms that doesn't get this error. But if you do get the error, don't worry. It's not a problem. All right. So look at this. Whoops. Look at this. So we've got this, we've added, and just by the way, you notice that when we added this note, it only goes in this particular contact, didn't go in any of the other contacts, which means that we're filtering things correctly. And actually, it might be good, just because we're here, let's go to Meteor, and then we can go to Mini Mongo, and we can see our notes field, okay, as well as our contacts field. You can look at that. You can look at the users field, and this can be super helpful for figuring out, kind of what's going on. So you can look at that at your own leisure. So we'll call it 32 minutes to get this done. And so we want to Control C to stop Meteor. And then stop at 32 minutes, pause, and then commit and push our Notes 1 branch. Notes 1 finished in 32 minutes. So we'll say Notes 1 finished in 32 minutes. Commit to Notes 1, push origin. Okay, there we have it. Okay, so kind of a complicated one. Take a little bit longer, 32 minutes. But once you get this one down, you can basically build really complicated, data models and understand how to put them together in Meteor and how to kind of selectively publish whatever aspects of a particular collection you actually need to any particular client, which is an important skill. And then, we introduced the Groovy feed semantic UI component, which is kind of a fun way. And I did not display it in a very fun way at all. I'm not gonna lie. That's like super boring the way I did it. So, I challenge you when you come up with your applications, take that feed component out for a spin and do something much nicer with it than what I did. That was pretty lame. All right, see you next time.